I took the face out of the clamps and I'm just going to scrape off the worst, the high spots of the glue. I'm not worried about getting all of it because the planer will do a lot of it, but the high bubbles of it we want to take off. Okay, now take it to the planer. Our next step is here at the planer, and we're going to take this down to about 1/8 of an inch on the planer. In the end, it'll be 1/8. The machine itself can only go down to about 3/16, which is good, which is very good. And then the sander will do the rest. So we're gonna go down to 3/16, and that will take a different amount of cuts depending on how thick this was when you started. It should be pretty close to about 3/8 or so, but I wanted to show you what we're doing. This eventually is what it will look like, and you can see how thin that is. It's about 1/8 of an inch. It's already been sanded. So this turned out just fine, but it is rather flimsy, so be careful. But through no fault of their own, sometimes this happens. Okay, didn't see that the grain was facing a weird direction. The planer could tear it apart. So this is a beautiful piece of walnut, just broke. Just kind of like when we were bending our sides, things break. So in this case, she had to make another one, but that's okay. The second one worked just fine. So please don't be discouraged. Once in a while, just through no fault of your own, this can happen. So let's set up the planer. We'll keep running it through until it works. Something else that'll really help. Before I cut this piece of scrap. This is just a piece of junk I found in the scrap bin, and I cut it to about the same thickness as the board we're going to be sending through the planer. This planer, while a fantastic planer, sometimes will catch the board so it's stuck. By putting a piece of wood behind it, this will push through this, so you'll get a better cut. I don't care if this gets stuck. The scrap is junk, we're gonna throw it away later. But I highly recommend this. If a lot of you, a couple of you are doing these at the same time, push one board through, the next person put their board directly behind and touching the one in front. So the second person's board will push the first one through. The last guy will have this stick. So however it works for you, just make sure you have one of these cut. Lower it down to, I measured this with my tape measure, and it is about 3/8 of an inch. Okay, and we just go until it's in the right place. So there's 3/8. I'm looking at the measurement, and here we go. So my first cut went beautifully. There's a little tear out here, but other than that, it's perfectly smooth. We'll just keep flipping the board until we get down to 3/16. Now that I've sent it through the planer 2 times, once on each side, it's fairly flat. There's a little bit left you can see on the sides. But I mentioned before that this is going to get really thin. The thinner it gets, the more likely it could bend in there and shatter in places like I showed you before. So to kind of try to prevent that from happening, we're going to use what's called a backing board or something to carry it through, a carrier board. This piece of MDF is perfectly flat, and I put sandpaper on it so that it grips the piece. And all we're going to do is take your mostly flat board and put it right on top like that. Okay, now in doing that, I've now made it thicker than where I left off. So simply take your tape measure and measure from here to here. At this point, mine's about 1 1/16 or so, so you'll have to drop the table to about 1 1/16. So I'll lower it down, and then we'll continue planing both of these. All right, I've got the planer at where I need it. Put this on top of the board, making sure it doesn't sit on top of this little bit that sticks up high. We don't want that to be, this to be higher than it should be. Run the whole board through. Turn it, flip it over, and continue the process until you get it down to around that 3/16 that we're going for. All right, I've got one last pass, and the planer is at 15/16. So I'm gonna flip it so that my side that I want to plane one more time is up, and 15/16 should be my last run, and then the sander will do the rest. We're gonna sand down to around 0.125. Could be a little more or a little bit less, but right in that range, that's 1/8 of an inch. Set it as usual and keep running it through until you get that measurement. I sanded this down to exactly 0.125 and noticed right here there's a little bit of a breakout where the planer dug out some more material, and that would be, I'd consider that my bad side. So this is my good side, the one that's nice and smooth, no breakouts, nothing like that. So have your best side down, your face down on the table. Now I laid these mats out, it's easier to see on the camera because of the contrasting colors. But also, I don't want it to get scratched on my table at all. So I'm being very careful. Feel free to use these foam mats if you like. Now, each ukulele will have two patterns, okay? One for the front and one for the back. And they are different. As far as the little cutouts, as you can see, there's some cutouts all the way around. Now, each of these cutouts are gonna be marked, and we'll get to that in just a moment. So what you want to do is take one of your cutouts, and you can see there's a dotted line right down the middle. We want to line that up with the center line of where you glued your boards together. And that makes it look very good. So if it's off to the side, then your center line's out of off center and it just doesn't look right. So put it nice and tall, close to the outer edge. If it helps, because the more I cover up, the harder it is to see. Go ahead and put a pencil line so you can see the center. And down here at the end, I line that up, and then go ahead and trace on the outside. All the way around. Now while I have it, I want to trace all of the cutouts as well. So just all of these little rectangles, the little circle where the center is for the sound hole, all of these little cutouts, and this one as well, and these at the bottom. Now take the back panel and you're going to do exactly the same thing. Line these up fairly close to each other. There we go, centered. Now notice I've got quite a bit of room down here at the bottom. There's a reason for that, which we'll get to in a second, but I don't want to put this way down at the bottom and use up that space. I'll explain that as we move along. We need that for another piece. And do exactly the same thing. Trace it and all of the cutouts. Good. Now the patterns, and they're all the same. Now these particular patterns have some extra laser engraved lines on them. These two lines on the outside represent the edges of your ukulele that we bent. If you haven't done it already, you will. So each of these patterns are actually cut a little more than 1/8 of an inch wider than what it actually will be. So in other words, when I go to the bandsaw to cut these out, staying outside the line will now add even more. If I cut right on the line, I'd still be 1/8 of an inch oversized all the way around. So keep that in mind as you're cutting on the bandsaw, because obviously the next step is cut all these out. Don't worry about the cutouts for now. We're just cutting the body, so you'll have something that looks like this just without the cutouts. All right, we take your board over to the sled, the table saw with the sled, and I'm gonna just trim off the end to get it squared up. I don't want to take off very much, maybe a blade width. Okay. Now what I want to do with what's left is I want to measure down about 3/4 of an inch. So we take your tape measure and at the top edge,
Just measure over 3/4 right there. And if you're a hair off, that's okay, but 3/4 of an inch is our goal. And then line it up with the blade. So put it back up and make sure that the line is on that side of the blade so that you actually get 3/4 and not 5/8, because you're gonna lose 1/8 of an inch. That's the reason I left so much extra on the bottom, is in case this, as you cut, if it's the wrong size, you get another chance. If it breaks, you can cut another one, and so forth. So make that cut. You only need one. Good. And assuming that looks right, it's the right size, just don't lose it. Keep a hold of it. Now you're going to cut out both of the shapes. Try to stay just outside the line. I'd rather have it too big than too small. For the next parts of the faces, these two faces, the ones that I cut out, don't have any major defects. There are no knots, there's no cracking, there's nothing that has to be filled. On my old one, the one that I use as an example, there are some open knots here. So I want to show you how to fix that in case yours has any. First thing, put some tape on one side. It doesn't really matter which side, but we don't want super glue or epoxy coming through, and that one there, and dripping onto the table. Otherwise we'll just continue pouring and it'll keep going through. Now for very tiny bits, like this knot for example, I can fill it with almost nothing. There's very little there to do. So I'm going to take some super glue, and this is the stuff with the pink top. Don't get the other stuff, the pink one. It's a little thinner, and that'll allow it to run in there a little bit better. It's very simple. Just put it on the edge of it and let it dribble down in. If I just shove it in there and pour it, you're going to have some holes underneath it. So kind of move it around. Give it a moment to kind of soak in. You're welcome to use your finger to push it down, but be careful. It is super glue. It's going to bond your fingers pretty quick. So I don't mind doing that a little bit, and that a little bit, and then just kind of rubbing the super glue off on something. Now take this brown bottle. It says Penmaker's CA. This is a catalyst, and you just spray, and that'll be dry in about 2 minutes, 60 seconds to 2 minutes. Now I have a little knot right here that's a little bit loose. I'm just going to pour a little bit right there. I use my breath to kind of blow it in. The same thing as my finger. It kind of works with smaller ones. Spray it, and that'll dry as well. So those two are done. Now this one's a little bit different. This one is a bigger opening. I can see through it. I would use epoxy with this one. So what we do with epoxy, we mix it up. It's a 50-50. We mix up 50% of one and 50% of another, so they're the same amounts. Stir it up really good. Put in any colorant that you have, if any, and then you'll pour it in. So we're basically doing the same thing, but it's a bit of a longer process. I can't fill that with super glue. It would use too much of my glue, and it wouldn't look as good anyway. So if you do have large openings, come and get me. I will kind of go through how to use epoxy if that's what you want to use.